as our context. But the purpose behind it is not so much going into criminal law, but rather just start thinking a little bit about the nature of the internet and new media generally, cyberspace, relevant applications and technologies, thinking about their implications vis-a-vis the capacity that individuals have to communicate to vast audiences for the purposes of engaging in criminal activity. So it's not the criminal stuff that's so important, as opposed, I mean, it's relevant, but really the criminal law stuff is just a vehicle for us to think and try to gain some insight into the potentialities of the internet, cyberspace, and think about them in a more rigorous fashion than you might otherwise. I mean, it's an obvious sort of observation to say, wow, the internet and cyberspace enable us to communicate to huge audiences. I mean, that's not a profound insight. Where it becomes relevant and I think enlightening is to put it in a specific context in criminal law and talk about our old friend liability. So really this is just another opportunity to explore that idea of liability that we've been looking at in several cases from a unique angle. So the big picture is liability, right? That's our issue. Where with new media, the internet, whatever you want to term it as. So we've got new media, the internet, the relationship that flows from the new media and internet to the issue of liability. But I want to put it in the context of criminal law, because again, semester's over, tuitions are going up, you're going to need more money from parents and just justify your existence at university. Just, again, you're not studying communication, because people laugh at you when you tell them that. You're studying new media, criminal law, you're studying constitutional law, and the implications of new media for constitutional law. That'll shut up your friends that make fun of you as an art student. It'll shut your parents up, they'll open their wallets. Because what we're really looking at is we're living under the tent of communication. But really what we're exploring are very particular issues related to new media, particularly liability, because again, just in all seriousness, one thing that's really important that we have to consider with the implications of new media in social, political, economic terms is a question of liability. And liability cannot be carved off from responsibility. Again, just as rights and obligations are inextricably linked, so are duties and responsibilities. Okay? So what we have with liability is a question of responsibility. And when you have responsibility, you also have duties. And with responsibility, what we're interested in is exploring intention. So our philosophical context, because it just sounds more important than it probably is, the philosophical concern is with the idea of intention. The expression, what is it, the road to hell is paved with good intentions or something, I don't know. Anytime I've ever been in trouble with my wife, it's always, well, I didn't mean to do that, I really wanted, it just doesn't matter what you intended to do, what are the outcomes? What are the consequences? And the consequence is a very chilly reception at home for a few days, but we all get over that. So what we have then with intention, you have consequences. And I think it's worthwhile considering that a lot of what we might do online in terms of posting defamatory or potentially defamatory comments, for example, just in terms of our use of the internet, new media, and social media in particular, we have to concern ourselves with the relationship between our intentions and our consequences. But when we consider consequences, what we're really looking at is this relationship. Intention and motive. Because there's a big difference between your motivations for doing something and intentions. Intent and motive are not necessarily the same things. And that's sort of the underlying sort of interest I have in this case in terms of what makes it, what moves us beyond some like stupid law school course and takes us into a deeper consideration in an attempt to gain insight. Is the relationship between motive and intention, and they both lead to consequences. In this little case, because we only have one case, we're talking about legal consequences, not moral or ethical. Not moral or ethical. CMN 4105, when they teach in the fall, 2 sections of it are going to open up. That's where we have fun. That's where we start thinking about morality and ethics. That course I'm designing to look at, ethics in the information age. Okay, and that again gives us a chance to interrelate law, sociology, psychology, philosophy, and in particular moral ethics. I mean, it's a fun course. It'll be a lot of fun if anybody decides to take it. So this is how we can look at R.V. Hamilton. So that's how you map this stuff out. You got this. You write this down. You just think about it. Then you read the case. Well, then you see, number one, you learn the particulars of the case. You learn R.V. Hamilton. What was that issue? What are the outcomes? But that's not as important as sort of mapping out a broader relationship of concepts and ideas. So really, R.V. Hamilton is just one case that gives us insight into a whole bunch of relationships and how these things interrelate. But again, it has spillover effects into our understanding of our careers and our everyday lives. I mean, the Ontario Human Rights Commission released a judgment a week ago dealing with Facebook. And the issue there was whether or not employers can force or request, whether or not employers can request of applicants and employees, require them to divulge their Facebook passwords. Well, don't be shocked. This goes on all the time now. This is involving a police officer. A lot of you will run into this. This is standard practice in human resources now. Absolutely. Some of you, especially as you're moving this year now, you will sit in a job interview. Prior to this ruling by the Human Rights Commission, it's only an Ontario Human Rights Commission. I mean, this is just these little kangaroo courts. They'll set the tone, but this is going to work its way very soon into to the Supreme Court of Canada. This kind of issue, it's a pervasive practice. Talk to your friends in HR. This stuff goes on, and if it's not a practice, it's an overt practice. It is still quite common. I have some former students that went on to specialize in, or they do specialize. They do consulting for headhunting firms, and one of the big things now in human resources and headhunting and careers are people that specialize in doing background checks. There's nothing new about background checks. It's just now the internet, new media, and cyberspace make it possible to do more in-depth background checks, more substantive background checks. Because now you're not going and interviewing former friends or current friends or whatever employees to get a background profile of a person. You can learn a lot more about a person, what their values are, what they're about, what their ethics are, if you can, if you can see their Facebook postings, for example. Their private correspondence. I mean, only a fool writes in a journal what they really think. You're crazy if you actually write what you really think. Can you imagine? You write if you're a journal keeper, maybe a lot of people do this, but I know it's important to vent these things, and that's one thing Oprah teaches people, write your feelings and do this. Yeah, but what do you do? You're angry at your child because they spilled milk on the carpet. You decide to have some big vent fest about how awful it is being a parent and all that stuff. And then you forget about it. 5 minutes later, you feel great. What are you going to do 30 years from now? Your child finds that. You read that. I mean, it's just awful. Well, these things we record are now common fodder for employers as well as lawyers in preparing for court defenses, sentencing hearings. I mean, this stuff is incredible. But yeah, this is a ruling that it was people. You have to be prepared now when you go to a job interview to walk out of an interview when you're asked these questions, because they're coming. Until they're prohibited that law, they will happen. This ruling by the Ontario Human Rights Commission is not a precedent-setting case. Okay, it's a precedent in the sense you have a board making a declaration on that, but until the courts weigh in on this or legislation is passed, it's becoming a fairly common. Can you imagine you're sitting there, and it's this job you really want, it's going to be a great career start. You're just starting. It's like being a musician. That you'll sign any contract put in front of you if you get a record deal. Well, most of us, when we're graduating, what do you do? About $90,000 in debt. It's a great opportunity to get a job with the federal government or wherever. And they say, okay, well, yeah, this is a great interview. We'd like now to pull up your Facebook page, and we want your password. Whoa, that's heavy stuff. Common practice. Here, Olivia, you had a question?
Yeah,
just a bit louder though.
Yeah, I read an article about this by a human resources director, and he basically said this backfires because out of the applicants, some walked away, but some gave away their password. And afterwards they said, for example, one of them was a lesbian, and she said, now you know that I'm lesbian, you cannot refuse to hire me because then I'm going to go for discrimination. And same with another guy who was like, well, I'm going to have a baby, and you can see that on my Facebook, so I'm going to exercise my right to parental, I don't know what, like, yeah, holidays or anything. But you cannot not hire me knowing that. And the resources guy said basically, having access to a guy's Facebook put me in a delicate position because I know stuff that I shouldn't, and then it's supposed to influence my judgment. So in the end, it even backfires with the employees themselves.
Those things, I mean, it's not a guarantee. You can always, anybody that doesn't get a job finds some reason. We all do that. We find some reason, well, what can I do to get? Point taken. It's the same thing, practice. Okay, well, what do you do if you're grading essays? Practice I have when I have essays is I ask for student numbers, no names on them. Why? Because someone, you can say, well, you know who I am, or if you've had a disagreement, or someone's been rude to you, or they're just stupid and you don't like them. Arguably, if you know who they are, it could influence your judgment, could it not? So the notion of grading someone based on in a subjective context, it goes to Pierre Olivier's observation. If you're grading someone in a subjective context, such as a hiring or any kind of human relations, those human relations work, human resources work is fraught with difficulties, right? So we try to minimize these as much as possible. So the practice itself, yeah, of course it can have backfire, but I think the implications we have to deal with here it's this kind of stuff. There are liability issues that Pierre Olivier touches on. So that's why liability is such an important concept. So let's take a look at this. Just a few of the points. Go right into page 4. Just a couple of points in the head I want you to read. You know the facts, so I don't need to go over those. The core problem then, for this case, is the internet. They refer to cyberspace, whatever context I'll talk about new media. Because I think new media cyberspace is a component of new media. The term for me, new media, constitutes not only the architecture, such as the internet, but also the associated technology, et cetera, et cetera. So new media is the big concept, the big context I want to talk about. But if you go to paragraph 4, page 4, first paragraph, last sentence. Just in the margin, just make a note. This is the core problem. This is the big philosophical problem that envelops the legal problem the case represents. Courts cannot, and this also is the link to new media. So if you're still the one that's sitting out there going, this course has nothing to do with media, it's law. Well, I can't help you by now. If it's not clear to you the relationship and how this is all about new media, it's just that we're exploring new media through the rigors of studying the law and its social, political, philosophical implications. If you don't get it by now, then we're after today, we're done, and that's good, and we'll go our separate ways.